culture is not decoration, but it has never been historically.
Hardcore.
Because we understood that all that art had come out of a certain kind of historical experience.
John LaRose is my mentor, my teacher, my friend, and my comrade.
So more than any university or college or anything else that I've ever attended, my education, both in terms of cultural affairs and political affairs, was obtained at the hands, at the feet of John LaRose.
He's intensely curious and has this extraordinary memory and this tremendous belief in continuity, in the importance of each generation knowing what went before and seeing things as all building on each other. I think the fact that he called his first volume Foundations is very significant, and the way he called his publishing firm New Beacon, because he saw it in the footsteps of the great Beacon movement in Trinidad of the 30s.
I had what I call an epiphany, this moment when issues you've been working on just become very clear and a whole new path opens up. This epiphany manifested itself in terms of my thinking, right, I don't think I want to work on unnamed migrant writers in London. I think I want to find out some more about this man, John LaRose.
I remember meeting John and thinking, oh, what a lovely smile. and we just sort of just met, and then I discovered he was the man behind these radical newsletters. And then we met another month or two later. We found ourselves, because that was in '65, we found ourselves on the same committee, which was about the invasion of the Dominican Republic and protesting about that. And that's really when we really got together.
I think that young people now, if they want information, they go to the internet. Well, John was kind of my internet. If I wanted to know anything about arts or politics, I could click on John, and then I could get, whatever answer that I wanted, or he would point me in the right direction.
My name is Errol Lloyd, and I've known John since the early years of the Caribbean artist movement. Here we are strolling down Stroud Green Road in North London, home of New Beacon Bookshop, and reflecting on the tremendous changes over the years which have made the neighbourhood so culturally diverse and dynamic. We are on our way to John's house, where I will be talking to him about his life, which started in Trinidad in 1927. John is a poet, essayist, publisher, as well as a political and cultural activist. The range of his interests, combined with his acute intellectual energy, has ensured that John's influence has spread far and wide and spanned many generations of writers, artists, academics, and activists. To enter John and Sarah's house is to enter an environment of creativity, where one can play music, look at art, and endlessly discuss the issues of the day or be privy to some local or national campaign. There are books, paintings, sculptures, as well as the more intimate photos and mementos of friends, family, and comrades. Occasionally, one may even hear John reading his own poetry.
Exporting ourselves from hopelessness into hope, from disillusion into anemic illusion, avoiding the pilgrimage of return into the dark, unmentionable habitats that lie in ourselves, and live to fight. Such as we are the salted embryo of a world whose fixities grow loose, while our world, once indecently naked and ruthless, firm and gel, for the encounter with history, ready. Fragments of roots scorned in the night of self-contempt, spring to rebirth, the seed of renewal. Exile, bathed spring in self-awareness. We begin to know. A message of hope and contradiction, but such is my message. The first thing, my interest was really in music and literature, not in politics or trade unionism. I got to the point where in my teens I was introduced to modern English poetry. Auden, Spender, Dylan Thomas, T.S. Eliot. Now that's unusual, because all you'd have learned was Wordsworth and Keith and Shelley, as you would have learned yourself, and Shakespeare. We were interested in the classical composers, Beethoven, Bach, and because we had such a high tradition of music in Trinidad, musicality, especially in the calypso and the string band and all of that, we were seeing how would we turn all that into a kind of classical music of our own. And one of the things that we saw as a model were the Russian composers, the Nationalist Five, Kui, Borodin, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Balakirev. And we used the folk music as Chopin used the folk music in composition. Beethoven, Bach, all of that, Vivaldi, all of those musicians. That was my first interest. So that will remain a permanent interest in everything else I've done and have been doing since that time.
John can wax lyrical about calypso, about steelpan, about reggae. You know, John is nearly 75, and he can talk with great authority about reggae.
He's so eclectic and wide-ranging. I mean, I know he told me when he first came to Britain, he used to value free tickets to the Wigmore Hall. I can't remember how he got them, but he's a real addict for classical music alongside. John is as comfortable with mainstream European culture as he is with Caribbean culture, which is quite unusual.
I was introduced around that time by a friend who was one of the leading Trinidad writers. He was a poet called Neville Giuseppe, and he said, "Have you read anything by Marx?" And I said, no, Marx and communism and so on, I've never heard of. I just know people denigrate these things. And he lent me a book, which was simply called Lenin. It was about the Russian Revolution.
Books were his world. Now, when it came to politics, you wouldn't believe Neville was a rank Marxist and all this sort of thing. No, I am not into that. You couldn't believe that a quiet man like Neville, but he knew his politics and so on. So much so that when John started coming around, and then John, shall I say, got into trouble, Neville regretted having, led him astray. John said, "Not at all, you have opened the world for me."
The second book he introduced me to was C.L.R. James' The History of Negro Revolt. Those two things had a tremendous impact on my life.
John would come here, and they would sit and talk books, talk politics. And then it's the talking of the politics that made Neville get worried after, when John got into hot water, And John said, "Oh, no. You made my life."
We know that we must get into books. People won't discover what we have discovered without the world of books. And we started a small book-selling operation. And strangely, I had to finance it, especially when I went to Venezuela, because I had more money then. So I was sending more money back to Trinidad to help to finance a small book-selling operation in Prince Street. But the book that sold most was sold in 1957, the autobiography of Kwame Nkrumah. People were just buying it up like hotcakes. It's a whole new world they're discovering about Africa, their own African heritage, and the transformation of the African heritage by the main leader of that. And who was with him? George Padmore. Padmore had influenced his trajectory. And then when he he got independence in 1957, Padmore went on there as his African advisor.
George Padmore, a Trinidadian, was a major figure in the anti-colonial and international socialist movements of the 20th century. In 1924, he went to study in the United States, where he joined the Communist Party. In 1929, he was invited to the Soviet Union to work as secretary of the International Trade Union Committee of Negro Workers. But he grew disenchanted with communism's commitment to colonial freedom and in 1935 moved to London, where for the next 20 years he was a leading advocate of Pan-Africanism. It was in London that he met and became a close ally of Kwame Nkrumah, who led Ghana to become the first colony in Africa to win independence in 1957.
So that's where I started from. And that's where I've always remained. This is the foundations of my way of understanding the Caribbean, my way of understanding the world. And for me, it's not either black people or West Indian people or that kind of nationalism. It's really the dream to change the world. Essentially, art and culture was where we thought we would make a big change in our society, because we knew the significance of carnival and calypso. And the music which had come out of all of that, in addition to the art that came out of that.
Cause every night I lie down in my bed, hearing a bassman in my head.
Because carnival is an art. Not simply dance and music, it's also an art. And we are seeing all of this and looking at it, trying to study it and understand it, the complexities of it.
Cause we carnival is river canal, it's the hottest summer festival. With plenty steelpan, playing we calypso, hot fun, summer as you go. No segregation, is one vibration, everyone really having fun. You could jump as you like, dance as you like, this is we carnival. Trinidad for the greatest summer festival.
The carnival was an expression of both the cultural creativity, especially of ordinary people. Ordinary black people, former slaves in our society, who transformed the carnival from being a white people's carnival from Alsace-Lorraine to being the kind of popular carnival which it became after the abolition of slavery. But because this transformation had occurred with the abolition of slavery, it carried into effect those revolts against slavery. For the Neg Jardin, for example, which terrified the colonial regime, these were the garden blacks, garden Negroes. And because they were reincarnating in their carnival, the experience of their revolts and oppression under slavery, it carried that political expression into the calypso as well.
Now listen what I am outlining to you. Negroes fought
in World Wars I and II. Some lose their lives, others lose a hand. We fought gallantly for the United Nations. So if we Negroes are good enough to fight, I don't see why we can't have our equal right. For God made us all, and in Him we trust. Nobody in this world is better than us.
And into the art as well. All that music was for us the basis for the transformation of music in our society and art in our society. Proverbs were important. For example, though I'm a great book lover, on the whole, the popular tradition had it, sense make before book. And that was important because I then began to try to understand what these proverbs really meant. It really meant that the experience of people in a society is what the academic and researchers use to write their books. And that what you go to is the original source of that experience, and the people who have experienced it. So it's generally people at the bottom of the society.
No, it's not my nature. No, me as an individual. Me as an individual.
All right? You know that.
And those are the same people who are making carnival, especially at that time in our society, who are making calypsos, who are making later on steelpan. And language just keeps changing. So that beautiful language keeps changing in our society. All kinds of new words and all kinds of new ideas which come from those words.
It's a big Creole bacchanal held in the sunny islands of Trinidad and Tobago. A season of spring, a spirit of calypso. Old and young does be in the streets. Everybody catch the carnival fever heat. You're hearing the shoof, shoof, shoof at the feet as the dancing foot, soul and street chip a beat.
You could talk about performance poetry, the nation language poetry, let reggae poetry, you know what I mean? Dub poetry.
I was wondering if I could shape this passion just as I wanted in solid fire. I was wondering if the strange combustion of my days, the tension of the world inside of me, and the strength of my heart were enough. I was wondering if I could stand as tall while the tide of the sea rose and fell. If the sky would recede as I went, or the earth would emerge as I came to the door of the morning, knocked against the sun.
The young people were discovering, by listening to reggae music and by listening to ska and so on, they could create something which was very unique and artistic in this society based upon their experiences. Horace Ove's film, Reggae, encapsulated that experience. The youngsters who are just totally involved with reggae, who are totally influenced by reggae, the language of reggae, the music of reggae.
You want to hear Monkey Man, don't you? You want to hear Monkey Man?
But that's how every monk can be.
timely. Horace films that. And that was one of the first documentaries that had a real power here. It was all happening in some kind of thread, tying together various kinds of threads in our society. Sam Selvin, I mean, that language that he uses, especially in The Lonely Londoners, is classic. It's a classic book, Lonely Londoners.
The place where Tolroy and the family live in was off the Harrow Road, and the people in that area are called working class. Wherever in London that it have working class, there you will find a lot of spades. This is the real world, where men know what it is to hustle a pound to pay rent when Friday come. The houses around here are grey and weather-beaten, the walls cracking up like last days of Pompeii, and they didn't have no hot water.
He's inventive in the use of language, because in that particular book, it's the first time a West Indian author, a Caribbean author, is at the one time has his characters speak in the nation language, and his authorial voice, which describes what leads up to the characters, are also in the same language. Yes? Before that, West Indians weren't writing like that.
But John, of course, had worked in Venezuela. He was fluent in French and Spanish. He was already reading Guillen from Cuba, Aimé Césaire from Martinique, Edmond Glissant from Martinique or Guadeloupe. He was extraordinarily widely based and widely focused.
Los libros se forman solos. Van haciéndose al hilo de los días como una historia. Nunca me he propuesto escribir un libro. Ellos nacen, como mis palabras, en el vivir cotidiano. Mi reflexión es fragmentaria. Los poemas son momentos. The poems are moments. Anotaciones, notations, Rafael Cadenas. So all of that was part of what we were seeing together, culturally and politically and artistically, as one thing. That's why for us, art and culture is not decoration, but it has never been historically. But nevertheless, some people want to say art for art's sake. But we were never in that, because we understood that all that art had come out of a certain kind of historical experience.
We didn't come alive in England. We didn't come alive in Britain. You know, we didn't start our struggles here. You know, we have a history of struggle against colonialism.
Captain Cipriani, a returned hero from the First World War, fighting for the British West Indian Regiment in Egypt, was one of the earliest advocates of the move towards independence from the colonial masters. Appalled by the conditions of the poorer classes, in 1919 Cipriani supported the workers in the industrial strike and went on to form the Trinidad Labour Party. As mayor of Port of Spain, his achievements included the clearing of the city slums, the establishment of a minimum wage, old age pensions and compulsory education.
We were very aware of what Cipriani had done, the Dominica Conference of 1932. This was a conference held in 1932 in Dominica, and Cipriani was the leading figure there, and he had the biggest movement, the Trinidad Labour Party. His slogan was, agitate, educate, federate. It was a popular mass movement that challenged the British domination and was moving towards independence. That is in 1932, before the general strikes and insurrections of 1937. In trying to understand Caribbean society, we had studied Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. We had studied the book by Thomas, which people call the patois grammar, the theory and practice of Creole grammar, the language and proverbs that came out of that experience. And we had also studied the book by Arthur Lewis called Labor in the West Indies, about the general strikes and insurrections from 1935 to 1938 that really changed the politics of the Caribbean irreversibly. From that moment on, we were on the road to independence, and we were part of that road. I was the one with the greatest confidence that it would succeed, simply because of the fact of my own organizational experience in the Caribbean with the trade union movement, with the mass movement, because we'd had a demonstration in 1953 of tens of thousands of people in the street. And the slogan we had in that period, with the support of the steelpan movement in Trinidad. And our slogan was, British Guiana today, Trinidad and Tobago tomorrow. Now that terrified the British authorities, because for the first time they could see the possibility of a kind of revolutionary breakthrough in Caribbean politics. And that was the spirit of nationalism and the spirit of the abandonment of colonialist cultural domination and challenging it within the Caribbean perspective. And that would have needed to be involved with Mento.
Drumming was banned throughout the colonies to suppress communication between the enslaved Africans and the expression of their religions and culture. But Mento, a music with origins in West Africa, survives today in Jamaica, and its influences are to be found in reggae.
And the language of the calypso. The language of the calypso was our language. It was a language that was trying to transform and interpret our experience.
They tell me that Adam is the father of all man if he made everybody. Why can't I make a Chinese if I had a Chinese son and I had an Indian son? They controlling the money. My pocket won't be empty. I going up.
What we said was, our very first poets were our Calypsonians.
And I can't go taller. When I pull up my belly, it's straight in the lava tree. I going up. I going up. I just can't help it. I going up.
It's the very first poetry which is natural and native to our society. What comes later on builds on that.
As Prime Minister of the newly independent state of Trinidad and Tobago, that I offer you for transmission to Her Majesty the Queen the profound thanks and appreciation of the government, Parliament, and people of this country for Her Majesty's gracious message.
Independence came in '62 in Jamaica and Trinidad. It came later on in the other islands.
Democracy means the equality of all in the eyes of the law. Democracy means equality of opportunity for all in education, in the public service, and in private employment.
What it meant was that these people had an experience of revolt and success, but at the same time, they had not been able to achieve the maximum success, which was a federation with independence. So I became, later on, the General Secretary of the West Indian Independence Party. But I was also an executive of the Trade Union Council. What we said was, in analyzing what had happened in the Caribbean, what we said was that the failure to establish a federation and to move the society forward on the basis of a federation meant that people would migrate from the society.
We are not asking for equality to rank with the rich in society, to visit their homes in their motor cars, or go to their clubs and smoke their cigars. We are asking for a living wage to help us now and provide for old age. Kind-hearted employers, I appeal now, could you give us work to do?
Because, this is the way the reasoning runs in academia, because most Caribbean migrants, yes, were working class or peasant, it follows from this that they had nothing of interest in intellectual terms to contribute to British society. This is our gross misrepresentation.
The people who came from the Caribbean are culture bearers. They bear with them the culture which they have inherited from their historical experience.
Boy, life really rough.
life really rough and tough. But me not give up. Me still a fight for me right.
That is in the case of Jamaica, Mento, and Ska, and all of those things.
Deliverance will come.
And the sound system, because we didn't have it in the Southern Caribbean. We had steel band. They brought that here with them. The people from other parts of the Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean particularly, because they had a right to come here by the Act of 1948, which made us citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. Nobody could stop us from coming here. We were part of the British Empire and part of British society.
You can go to France or America, India, Asia or Australia, but you must come back to London City.
We came here with culture of carnival, calypso, steel band. What we more or less made here was this connection which we did not have among the islands. And we created a much more powerful sense of ourselves. One of the key things about the Caribbean people and their migration to Britain, they had no sense of being minority. They had a strong majority consciousness, because we were majorities in the Caribbean who at some stage had terrified the colonial regime because of our capacity and possibility of transforming these societies with independence. This talk about minorities and ethnic minorities, that was not the language that we came with. We came with the language of majorities in majority consciousness, and who were very self-conscious about our artistic heritage.
Those of us who grew up in Jamaica, Grenada, Trinidad, or whatever, had some sense of belonging to a nation where we collectively were working to bring about change. So you could imagine yourself becoming the Prime Minister of Grenada or Trinidad or whatever. As a matter of fact, Keith Mitchell, the current Prime Minister of Grenada, started school at Presentation College in St. George's at the same time as me. We sat 2 desks away from each other. So it was not beyond our imagination to think that we could one day run this country.
We live in, the cliche of the global village, but who you are and what you bring from your cultures to Britain will enrich and change the culture.
It also applied to religion, because the black church had been very significant in challenging the establishment churches which were part of the colonial regime. The Roman Catholics, the Anglicans were part of that. But the black churches and the people who led them became the people who challenged with the mass support, like Butler in Trinidad was a Baptist. But he had the support of the majority of those oil workers. And he led a section of the general strike in Trinidad in 1937.
The conditions of the poor Indians and Negroes in sugar and oil respectively was nothing short of subhuman. Letter after letter was dispatched to the powers that be in the oil and sugar industry. No replies. But what about the alleviation of the condition of these poor workers? Well, nothing was attempted, nothing done. And so I thought that the time had come when we had to take positive action to achieve positive results.